You lost everything. This house is just the beginning.
The corporate Christmas party was exactly the kind of soul-crushing event I'd learned to endure with a steady supply of sarcasm and cheap whiskey. Vanessa's law firm had rented out the entire top floor of the Marriott downtown, complete with a jazz quartet that nobody was listening to and enough fake holly to choke a reindeer. I stood at the bar, watching my wife of 12 years work the room like she owned it. Vanessa Callahan was in her element here. Sleek black dress, perfect smile, shaking hands with partners who billed more per hour than most people made in a month. At 36, she still turned heads, and she knew it. Another whiskey, Nick? The bartender was a kid, probably making minimum wage to serve overpriced drinks to lawyers who'd bill their clients for the privilege of getting drunk. Make it a double. I've got at least 2 more hours of this corporate theater. I took a sip and watched Vanessa laugh at something one of the senior partners said. The laugh was genuine. She actually enjoyed this stuff. That's when Greg Porter walked in. Greg was everything I wasn't. Tall where I was average height, expensive suit where I wore my one good jacket, Harvard Law where I had a high school diploma, and 20 years of fixing classic cars with my hands. He was Vanessa's age, a rising star at the firm, and the kind of guy who probably never had grease under his fingernails. I watched Vanessa's face light up when she saw him. Not the professional smile she'd been wearing all night, something different, something that made my stomach clench. Greg, she moved toward him like a magnet finding metal. I'm so glad you could make it. They hugged, nothing unusual there. Lawyers hugged each other at these things like politicians at a fundraiser. But this hug lasted a beat too long. And when they separated, Vanessa's hand lingered on his arm. I knocked back the rest of my whiskey and ordered another. The evening dragged on with the usual corporate small talk. I made conversation with the other spouses, mostly wives, who looked as thrilled to be there as I felt. We talked about the weather or the holidays, anything but the fact that we were all counting minutes until we could escape. Around 10 o'clock, the jazz quartet started playing something slow and romantic. Couples drifted onto the makeshift dance floor. I looked around for Vanessa, thinking maybe we should make an appearance when I saw her already dancing. With Greg. They moved together like they'd done this before. Her hand rested on his shoulder, his on the small of her back. They were talking quietly, heads close together, and something about their body language made every instinct I had start screaming. I moved closer, using the crowd as cover. The music was loud enough that I had to strain to hear them, but I caught fragments of conversation. Can't keep doing this, Vanessa was saying. Just a little longer, Greg replied. After the holidays, we'll figure it out. My stomach dropped. Figure what out? Did you book a room? Vanessa asked. Yes, 322, same as last time. Same as last time? I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Good. Vanessa glanced around the room, and for a terrifying moment, I thought she'd spotted me. I already slipped something into his drink. He should be feeling it soon. His drink, my drink. I looked down at the glass in my hand, the third whiskey I'd been nursing for the past hour. When had Vanessa had access to it? Then I remembered. She'd brought me a fresh one about 20 minutes ago, said she was being a good wife. The room started to spin slightly, and I realized it wasn't just shock. Whatever she'd given me was starting to work. My limbs felt heavy, my thoughts sluggish. How long will it last? Greg asked. A few hours. Long enough. Vanessa's voice sounded far away now, even though they were only a few feet from me. He'll think he just had too much to drink. I stumbled toward a couch in the corner, playing up the effects of whatever pills was coursing through my system. Better to let them think their plan was working. My phone was in my jacket pocket. If I could just stay conscious long enough to use it. The couch was leather and expensive, the kind that probably cost more than I made in a month at my auto shop. I collapsed onto it with what I hoped looked like genuine unconsciousness, letting my eyes flutter shut while keeping them open just enough to see. Vanessa appeared in my limited field of vision, looking down at me with an expression I'd never seen before, cold, calculating, like she was looking at a problem that had been solved. Poor Nick, she said loud enough for nearby guests to hear. He never could handle his liquor. A few people chuckled. Someone, I think it was Jill, Vanessa's best friend from HR, said something about getting me some water. But Vanessa waved her off. He'll be fine. He just needs to sleep it off. I'll check on him in a bit. Through my barely open eyes, I watched her walk away, toward Greg, who was waiting by the elevators. My phone felt like it weighed 50 pounds, but I managed to pull it out and start recording. The video was shaky. My hands weren't exactly steady, but it clearly showed Vanessa and Greg getting into the elevator together. The timestamp read 10:47 p.m. I forced myself to stay awake, fighting whatever she'd given me. Around me, the party continued. People laughed, drank, made small talk about billable hours and court cases. Nobody paid attention to the mechanic passed out on the couch. Jill walked by again around 11:30. This time she stopped and looked down at me with something that might have been pity. "Nice night for a betrayal, huh?" I mumbled, testing whether she knew what was happening. She startled, clearly not expecting me to be conscious. "Nick, I thought you were asleep? Sedated?" "Yeah, that was the plan." I sat up slowly, the room spinning. "Question is, did you know about it?" Jill's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you don't." I stood up, swaying slightly. "Room 322, right? That's where they went?" The look on her face told me everything I needed to know. I made it home before Vanessa, which wasn't hard since she was busy in a hotel room with Greg Porter. Our house in Millbrook Heights was dark and quiet, a 3-bedroom colonial that we'd bought when things were good between us, back when I thought we were building a life together. The spare bedroom had become Vanessa's office over the past year. She claimed she needed space to work on cases, but now I wondered what else she'd been working on in there. The desk was locked, but I knew where she kept the key, taped under the bottom drawer, because my wife wasn't as clever as she thought she was. Inside, I found her second phone. I'd wondered about the extra phone for months. Vanessa claimed it was for work, something about client confidentiality. But as I scrolled through the messages, I realized just how naive I'd been. Hundreds of texts between her and Greg, going back 8 months, photos I never wanted to see, plans for meetings, trips, and tonight's little adventure. But it wasn't just Greg, there were messages from 2 other men, both from her firm. The worst part wasn't the betrayal itself, it was how organized it all was. Vanessa had a system. She'd created contact entries with fake names. Jenny from yoga was actually Greg. Mom's doctor was someone named David from the litigation department. At the bottom of one message thread, I found something that made my blood boil. A list titled Rules for Fun. Rule 1, never at our house. Rule 2, always have an alibi. Rule 3, keep Nick busy, distracted. Rule 4, if caught, deny everything. Rule 5, remember, he's not smart enough to figure it out. Not smart enough. The woman I'd supported through law school, whose student loans I'd helped pay off with money from my auto shop, thought I was too stupid to catch her cheating. I took photos of everything with my own phone, then put hers back exactly where I'd found it. Then I sat in the dark living room and waited. Vanessa came home at 3:17 a.m. trying to be quiet as she slipped through the front door. She'd changed clothes. The black dress was gone, replaced by jeans and a sweater she kept in her car for emergencies. Her hair was different too, pulled back in a ponytail instead of the elegant updo she'd worn to the party. "Sleep well, Ness?" I asked from the darkness. She jumped, nearly dropping her purse. "Nick, you scared me. I thought you'd be passed out until morning." Funny thing about that, I turned on the lamp beside my chair. The roofies didn't work as well as you hoped. Even in the dim light, I could see her face go pale. "Roofies? What are you talking about? You were drunk at the party. I brought you home." "No, you didn't. I drove myself home while you were busy in room 322 with Greg." I held up my phone, showing her the video I'd taken. "Want to see?" For a moment, Vanessa just stood there, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Then her lawyer training kicked in. "That doesn't prove anything. We went to his room to talk about a case. At 11 at night, after you sedated your husband." I stood up, pulling out her second phone. "Or maybe we should talk about Jenny from yoga and your rules for fun." The mask slipped. The composed, professional Vanessa disappeared, replaced by something ugly and desperate. "You went through my private things? You have no right." "I have no right?" The words came out louder than I'd intended. "I have no right to know that my wife has been screwing half her law firm for the better part of a year." "It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think." I was shouting now. 12 years of marriage and trust dissolving into rage. "You've been planning this, organizing it, making lists about how to deceive me better." Vanessa's composure cracked completely. "So what if I have? You think I want to spend the rest of my life married to a mechanic who smells like motor oil? You think I want to keep pretending that you're enough for me?" The words hit like a physical blow. "Then why didn't you just leave? Why the elaborate deception? Because divorce is expensive, Nick, and messy. This way was easier. Easier for who? She laughed, a sound with no humor in it. For me, it's always been about what's easier for me. I stared at the woman I'd married, wondering when she'd become someone I didn't recognize. So what happens now? Now you forget what you saw tonight. You delete those photos, you put my phone back, and we go on like nothing happened. And if I don't? Vanessa picked up a crystal glass from the side table, a wedding gift from her parents. If you don't, I'll make your life very unpleasant. I'm a lawyer, Nick. I know how to make problems disappear. Is that a threat? It's a promise. She drew back her arm and hurled the glass at my head. I ducked and it exploded against the wall behind me, crystal shards raining down on the hardwood floor. We stood there in the wreckage of our marriage, staring at each other with pure hatred. This isn't over, I said. Vanessa smiled, cold and sharp as the broken glass at my feet. Yes, it is. You're just too stupid to realize it yet. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in my garage, surrounded by the tools and half-restored cars that had been my refuge for 20 years, and planned my revenge. By sunrise, I had a strategy. Tommy Brennan showed up at 7 a.m. with coffee and donuts like he did most mornings. Tommy was my best friend, business partner, and the closest thing to a brother I'd ever had. He was also an ex-cop who'd left the force after getting tired of the politics and corruption. Now he worked with me, restoring classic cars and occasionally helping people solve problems the law couldn't handle. You look like heck, he said, handing me a cup of coffee. Rough night at the lawyer party? You could say that. I told him everything. The sedated drink, the hotel room, the second phone, the rules for fun. Tommy listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail. Jesus, Nick, I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Help me destroy them. Tommy grinned. It wasn't a pleasant expression. Now you're talking my language. What do you need? First, I need to lock down my assets. Vanessa's going to try to clean me out the moment she realizes I'm not playing along. Consider it done. I know a guy at First National who owes me a favor. We can freeze the joint accounts, claim suspicious activity. Second, I need dirt on Greg Porter. Real dirt, not just the affair. I'll make some calls. Guys like that always have skeletons. And third, I pulled out Vanessa's phone, which I'd taken back before she woke up. I need to find out who else is involved. This thing is bigger than just her and Greg. Tommy took the phone, scrolling through the messages. Marcy Chen. She's the paralegal, right? Lots of messages here about schedules, alibis. She's been helping coordinate this whole thing. Then we start with her. Marcy Chen was 28, single, and had been working at Vanessa's firm for 3 years. She was also deeply in debt, thanks to student loans and a gambling problem that she thought nobody knew about. Tommy's research had turned up some interesting details about her financial situation. I found her at lunch, sitting alone at a corner table in the deli across from the law office. She was small and nervous-looking, the kind of person who jumped when you said her name too loud. Marcy, Nick Callahan, Vanessa's husband? She looked up from her sandwich, eyes wide with surprise and something that might have been guilt. Oh, hi, Mr. Callahan. Is everything okay? That depends. Can we talk? She glanced around the deli like she was looking for an escape route. I don't know what this is about. It's about room 322 and the messages you've been sending to help coordinate my wife's affairs. The color drained from her face. I don't know what you're talking about. I sat down across from her and pulled out my phone, showing her screenshots of the messages between her and Vanessa. These messages, the ones where you help set up alibis and cover stories, the ones where you coordinate schedules so Greg and the others can meet with my wife. Marcy stared at the screen, her hands shaking. How did you get these? I'm not as stupid as everyone thinks. I leaned forward. Here's the thing, Marcy. I know about your gambling debts. I know you owe Jimmy Torino $15,000. I also know that Vanessa's been paying you extra to help with her little operation. She said you guys had an arrangement. An arrangement? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Did our arrangement include sedating me at the Christmas party? Marcy's eyes filled with tears. I didn't know about that. I swear, I just helped with scheduling and sometimes I'd call you to keep you busy when they needed to meet. Those late-night emergencies at the office, the weekend work sessions, all fake? She nodded miserably. Okay, Marcy, here's what's going to happen. You're going to help me, or I'm going to make sure Jimmy Torino knows exactly where to find you. And I'm going to tell your boss about the money you've been skimming from the client expense accounts. The receipts don't lie. Tommy used to be a cop, remember? He knows how to follow a paper trail. Marcy was crying openly now. What do you want? Information. I want to know everyone who's involved. I want to know about the money, the scheduling, everything. And I want copies of any documents that might be interesting. I could lose my job. You're going to lose a lot more than that if you don't help me. She wiped her eyes with a napkin. There are 3 men? Greg David Morrison from litigation and someone named Paul from the DA's office. Vanessa keeps files on all of them. Photos, messages, things they've told her about their cases. Blackmail material. Insurance, she calls it, in case any of them try to cause problems. This was better than I'd hoped. What kind of problems? David wanted to leave his wife for her. She had to discourage him. And Paul gave her information about some cases that helped the firm win some big settlements. Corruption, adultery, and blackmail. My wife was running quite an operation. I need those files, Marcy. I can't. They're in her private safe. Then you'll get me the combination. I don't know it. You'll figure it out. Because if you don't, I'll make sure everyone knows how helpful you've been, including Greg, David, and Paul. That evening, I put the first part of my plan into action. While Vanessa was at her book club, which I now suspected was code for something else entirely, I disabled her car. Nothing dramatic, just disconnected the battery and loosened a few key components. She'd be stranded until she called for help. Then I changed all the passwords on our joint accounts and the security system for the house. When she tried to use her key card to get into the garage, she'd find it didn't work anymore. I didn't have to wait long for the fireworks. My phone rang at 8:30 p.m. Nick, my car won't start and I can't get into the house. The security system isn't recognizing my code. That's strange, I said, not bothering to hide the satisfaction in my voice. Maybe there's a malfunction. This isn't funny. I'm stuck in the parking lot at the community center. You could call Greg. I'm sure he'd be happy to help. Silence on the other end of the line. Or David, or Paul, or maybe Jenny from yoga. Nick, the code's changed, Vanessa. So did the locks. You want back in your house? We're going to have a conversation about some new rules. You can't lock me out of my own home. Watch me. I hung up and poured myself a beer. Round 1 was mine. She showed up an hour later in a taxi, furious and ready for war. I watched through the window as she tried her key in the front door, then the back door, then tried to climb through a window that I'd already secured. Finally, she pounded on the front door hard enough to wake the neighbors. Open this door right now. I opened it but left the security chain engaged so she could only see part of my face. Evening, Ness. How was book club? Let me in. I don't think so. See, I've been thinking about our conversation last night, about how you find our marriage inconvenient. So I thought I'd make it more convenient for you. This is illegal. You can't lock me out. Actually, I can. I checked with a lawyer today. Not one from your firm, obviously, since the house is in my name, and you've been conducting extramarital affairs. I have every right to change the locks. Mrs. Larkin, our 70-year-old neighbor, appeared at her front door in a bathrobe. Is everything all right over there? Everything's fine, Mrs. Larkin, I called out. Just a domestic dispute, nothing to worry about. Vanessa turned to the older woman. He locked me out of my house. Mrs. Larkin looked back and forth between us, taking in the situation. Well, dear, maybe you should have thought of that before you started entertaining that young man in Nick's garage. Vanessa's mouth fell open. What? Oh yes, I've seen him. Handsome fellow, drives that fancy electric car. You two have been quite regular about your afternoon visits. Mrs. Larkin smiled sweetly. I was wondering when Nick would find out. I stared at my neighbor. They used my garage? Every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 2 months. Right there in broad daylight. Very inconsiderate, if you ask me. The rage that filled me was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. They hadn't just betrayed me. They'd humiliated me in my own home, in front of my neighbors. Thank you, Mrs. Larkin. That's very helpful information. Vanessa was backing toward the taxi, realizing that her situation had just gotten much worse. Where are you going, Ness? I called out. Greg's place? I hope he's expecting you because you're going to be staying there for a while. This isn't over, Nick. No, it's not. It's just getting started. The next morning brought the first sign that my plan was working. Tommy called at 6 a.m., laughing so hard he could barely speak. "You need to see this," he said. "Meet me at the shop." I found him in the office, laptop open, showing me a local news website. The headline read, "Lawyer's car vandalized in downtown parking garage." Below it was a photo of Greg Porter's Tesla, with cheater keyed into the driver's side door and all 4 tires flat. Someone had also left what appeared to be a used protection item on the windshield. "Please tell me you didn't." "I didn't," Tommy grinned. "But I know who did." Turns out Greg's been making enemies all over town. That stunt he pulled with the Henderson divorce case last year, Mr. Henderson has a very creative way of expressing his displeasure. The news is calling it vandalism. The news doesn't know about the affair yet, but they will. I spent the morning at the shop trying to focus on work while my phone buzzed with increasingly frantic messages from Vanessa. She'd spent the night at a hotel. Apparently Greg hadn't been as welcoming as she'd hoped, and was demanding that I let her back into the house. Around noon, she showed up at the shop. Callahan's Classic Auto Restoration occupied a converted warehouse on the industrial side of town. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. The smell of motor oil and metal polish, the sound of air tools and classic rock radio, this was where I belonged. Vanessa looked completely out of place in her designer suit and heels, picking her way carefully around the oil stains on the concrete floor. "We need to talk," she said. I looked up from the engine I was working on, a 1977 Mustang that belonged to a collector in Boston. "I'm busy. This is important. So is this carburetor? The customer's paying me $3,000 to rebuild it." She waited while I finished adjusting the mixture screws, her impatience radiating like heat from an engine. "You can't keep me out of my own house indefinitely. It's not your house, it's my house. Your name isn't on the deed. Half of everything you own is mine. We're married, are we? Because last night you seemed pretty eager to end that arrangement." Tommy walked over, wiping his hands on a shop rag. "Morning, Vanessa. Heard you had some car trouble last night." She glared at him. "Stay out of this, Tommy. Can't do that. Nick's my partner. His problems are my problems." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Speaking of problems, you might want to check the local news. Seems like your boyfriend had some trouble of his own." Vanessa pulled out her phone, and I watched her face change as she read the article about Greg's car. "You did this." "I was here all night," I said truthfully. Tommy can vouch for that. "We were working on the Mustang. You had someone else do it." "Prove it." She looked around the shop, taking in the other mechanics who were pretending not to listen to our conversation. "This is harassment. This is consequences," I corrected. "You want to play games, Ness? I've got 20 years of experience fixing things that are broken. And right now, you and Greg are very broken. What do you want?" "I want a divorce. I want half of everything you own, including your precious law practice. And I want you to admit what you've done." "Never. Then we'll do this the hard way." That afternoon, Marcy called me from a payphone. She sounded terrified. "I got into Vanessa's safe," she whispered. "But someone saw me. I think I'm in trouble." "What did you find?" "Files on all 3 men, photos, recordings, financial information, and something else. She's been taking money from client settlements, skimming off the top and hiding it in offshore accounts." This was bigger than adultery. This was felony theft. "Where are the files now?" "I made copies and put them in a safety deposit box. But Vanessa knows someone was in her office. She's questioning everyone. Deny everything. Can you get me the key to the safety deposit box?" "I'll try. But, Nick, there's something else. She's planning something. I heard her on the phone with Greg. They're going to try to have you arrested." "For what?" "Domestic violence. They're going to claim you threatened her, maybe hit her. Greg knows people in the DA's office." My blood ran cold. A domestic violence charge would destroy me, even if I could eventually prove my innocence. When? Night, I think. She's going to show up at the house with bruises and call the police. Bruises she gave herself? Or that Greg gave her? They've thought this through, Nick. You need to be careful. I thanked Marcy and hung up, my mind racing. If Vanessa was planning to frame me, I needed to be ready. Tommy and I spent the afternoon setting up cameras around my house. Small wireless units that would record everything and upload it to a cloud server. If Vanessa showed up with fake bruises, I'd have proof that she was lying. She arrived at 8 p.m., right on schedule. I watched through the window as she got out of Greg's Tesla. Apparently, he'd gotten his car fixed quickly. Her face was puffy and bruised, her lips split. She looked like she'd been beaten. but I was ready for her. I opened the door before she could knock, making sure the camera in the hallway caught everything. "Hello, Vanessa. That's quite a performance." She looked surprised that I wasn't shocked by her appearance. "Nick, please. I'm sorry about everything. Can we talk?" "Of course. Come in." She stepped inside, and I closed the door behind her. The cameras were recording everything, her movements, her expressions, the way she kept glancing around like she was looking for something. "I know you're angry," she began, "and you have every right to be. But hitting me isn't the answer." "Hitting you?" I kept my voice calm, conversational. "When did I hit you, Vanessa?" "Last night, when I came to the house. You dragged me inside and—" "That's interesting, because last night you never made it inside the house." Mrs. Larkin saw the whole thing from her window. "You stood on the porch, we talked through the door, and then you left in a taxi." Her confidence wavered slightly. "You're confused. You were drinking." "I don't drink anymore. Haven't touched a drop since you sedated me at the Christmas party." I walked to the kitchen, keeping my movements slow and non-threatening. "Would you like some coffee, or are you in a hurry to call the police?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do. This whole thing is a setup. You and Greg figured you could get me arrested for domestic violence, maybe get a restraining order, take the house. Very clever. You're paranoid." "Am I? Then you won't mind if I call the police myself. I'm sure they'd be very interested in hearing about your affair, the sedating incident, and those offshore accounts you've been hiding." The color drained from her face. "What offshore accounts?" "The ones you've been using to hide money stolen from client settlements." "Did you really think nobody would notice?" Vanessa stood there for a long moment, realizing that her plan had fallen apart. Then she did something I wasn't expecting. She started hitting herself. She slammed her fist into the wall, then grabbed a kitchen knife and made a small cut on her arm. A thin line of red welled up, and she smeared it on her shirt. "Stop!" I shouted, but she was beyond reasoning. She picked up a chair and threw it across the room, then overturned the kitchen table. Within seconds, she'd created a scene that looked like a violent struggle. Then she called emergency. "Please help me," she sobbed into the phone. "My husband is trying to end me. I'm at 247 Maple Street. Please hurry." I stood in the middle of the chaos, watching my wife destroy our home to frame me for a crime I hadn't committed. But I wasn't worried, because every second of it was being recorded in high definition. The police arrived in 4 minutes, 2 patrol cars and an ambulance. I met them at the front door with my hands visible and my voice calm. "Officers, I'm Nick Callahan. This is my house. My wife is inside, and she's having some kind of breakdown." The lead officer was a woman in her 40s, professional and alert. "Sir, we received a report of domestic violence. I need you to step outside while we assess the situation." "Of course, but I want you to know that everything that happened here tonight was recorded." I handed her a flash drive. "These are copies of the security footage. You'll want to see them." Inside, Vanessa was giving an Oscar-worthy performance. She'd collapsed on the kitchen floor, surrounded by the debris she'd created, red stains on her shirt, and tears streaming down her face. "He went crazy," she told the paramedics. "He said he was going to end me, that nobody would believe me because I am having an affair." The paramedic, a young man who looked barely old enough to drive, was gentle as he examined her injuries. "Ma'am, we need to get you to the hospital. Some of these cuts might need stitches." "I can't leave," she sobbed. "He'll come after me." "No, ma'am, he won't. The officers will make sure you're safe." Outside, the lead officer, her name tag read Martinez, was watching the security footage on her tablet. Her expression grew darker with each passing minute. "Mr. Callahan, this is very interesting video. I thought you might find it educational. Your wife appears to be creating evidence. That would be my assessment as well." Officer Martinez called her partner over. "Rodriguez, you need to see this." They watched together as Vanessa systematically destroyed the kitchen, hit herself, and cut her own arm. The audio was clear enough to hear her practicing her story before calling emergency. "Jesus," Rodriguez muttered. "I've never seen anything like this." "I have," Martinez said grimly. "False allegations are more common than people think, but usually they're not this well documented." When the paramedics brought Vanessa outside on a stretcher, she saw me talking to the police officers and her face went white. "He's manipulating them." She screamed, "Don't listen to him. He's dangerous." Martinez walked over to the stretcher, Ma'am, I need to ask you some questions about what happened tonight. I already told you. He attacked me. Yes, I heard your statement, but we also have security footage of the incident. She held up the tablet, showing Vanessa the recording. Would you like to explain this? I watched my wife's face as she realized her plan had failed completely. The tears stopped. The helpless victim act disappeared, replaced by cold calculation. That footage is fake. He doctored it somehow. Ma'am, this is time-stamped and uploaded to a cloud server in real time. It would be impossible to fake. Then he forced me to do it. He threatened me. With what? The recording shows him in the kitchen the entire time making coffee. You were alone when you started destroying the room. Vanessa looked around desperately, searching for some way to salvage the situation. That's when she spotted Greg's Tesla pulling up to the curb. Greg, she called out, tell them what he did to me. Greg Porter climbed out of his car, looking like a man who'd rather be anywhere else. He was perfectly groomed as always, but there was something different about his demeanor. He looked scared. Evening, officers, he said carefully. I heard there was some trouble. And you are? Martinez asked. Greg Porter. I'm a friend of Mrs. Callahan's. How good a friend? Rodriguez asked with a knowing look. Greg glanced at Vanessa, then at me, then at the police officers. We work together. Is that all? I asked innocently. Because I have some interesting text messages that suggest otherwise. You went through my phone! Vanessa shrieked from the stretcher. Your second phone, I corrected. The one you use for coordinating your affairs? Very organized, by the way. I especially liked the rules for fun list. Martinez looked interested. What kind of rules? I pulled out my own phone and read from the screenshots I'd taken. Rule 1, never at our house. Rule 2, always have an alibi. Rule 3, keep Nick busy and distracted. Rule 4, if caught, deny everything. Rule 5, remember he's not smart enough to figure it out. The silence that followed was deafening. Those are private communications, Greg said weakly. Between you and a married woman, Rodriguez pointed out, while planning to sedate her husband. You never what? Never sedated me at the Christmas party? Never used my garage for your little meetings? Never planned to frame me for domestic violence? Greg looked like he was going to be sick. I want to call my lawyer. Good idea, Martinez said. You're probably going to need one. Ma'am, she turned to Vanessa, I'm placing you under arrest for filing a false police report and destruction of property. You can't do this. I'm the victim here. No, ma'am, you're not. You're under arrest. As they loaded Vanessa into the back of a patrol car instead of an ambulance, she looked at me with pure hatred. This isn't over, Nick. Yes, it is, I replied. You're just too smart to realize it. The next morning, I woke up in my own bed for the first time in 3 days. The house was quiet, peaceful. No Vanessa, no drama, no lies. Tommy showed up with coffee and the morning paper. You made the news, he said, grinning. The headline read, Local lawyer arrested for false domestic violence claim. Below it was Vanessa's mugshot, looking nothing like the polished professional she'd always presented to the world. It gets better, Tommy said. Greg Porter was also arrested last night. Seems like when they searched his apartment, they found some interesting financial documents. What kind of documents? The kind that show he's been embezzling money from client settlements, with help from his paralegal girlfriend. I looked up from the paper. Marcy? Turns out she wasn't just helping coordinate affairs. She was helping them steal money. The FBI raided the law firm this morning. My phone rang. It was Marcy, calling from jail. Nick, you have to help me. They're saying I stole money, but it was all Vanessa's idea. She made me do it. Did she hold a tool to your head? No, but did she threaten your family? She said she'd fire me if I didn't help. So you chose money over doing the right thing. Silence on the other end of the line. I'm sorry, Marcy, but you made your choice. Now you get to live with the consequences. I hung up and poured myself another cup of coffee. Outside, Mrs. Larkin was watering her flowers and waving at me through the window. Life was good, but I wasn't done yet. 3 weeks later, Vanessa made bail. The charges against her were serious, filing false police reports, destruction of property, and now conspiracy to commit embezzlement. But her parents had hired an expensive lawyer who specialized in making problems disappear. She showed up at my house on a Tuesday morning, looking nothing like the confident woman I'd married. Her hair was unwashed, her clothes wrinkled, and there were dark circles under her eyes. "We need to talk," she said when I answered the door. "No, we don't. Please, Nick. I know I made mistakes." "Mistakes?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You sedated me, cheated on me, stole money, and tried to have me arrested for crimes I didn't commit. Those aren't mistakes, Vanessa. That's a pattern of criminal behavior. I can explain. I don't want explanations. I want you gone. This is my home, too." "No, it's not. Your name was never on the deed, remember? You were too busy with your career to worry about mundane things like property ownership." She looked around the neighborhood, taking in the curious stares of neighbors who'd seen her arrest on the news. Mrs. Larkin was pretending to garden while obviously listening to every word. "Where am I supposed to go? That's not my problem anymore. I have nowhere else. You should have thought of that before you decided to destroy our marriage." Tears started flowing down her cheeks, but I was unmoved. I'd seen her fake tears too many times to be fooled again. "What about Greg?" I asked. "Isn't he taking care of you?" "Greg won't return my calls. None of them will. Shocking. It's almost like they were only interested in you when it was convenient and risk-free. I know you hate me, but I don't hate you, Vanessa. Hate requires caring about someone. You're nothing to me now." The words hit her like a physical blow. She staggered backward, nearly falling off the porch steps. "I'll fight the divorce," she said desperately. "I'll make it as expensive and ugly as possible." "With what money? Your assets are frozen, remember? And your law license is suspended pending the criminal trial. Your parents disowned you last week. I saw the statement they gave to the press. Something about not condoning criminal behavior and being disappointed in their daughter's choices." Vanessa's face crumpled. "How do you know that?" "Because I made sure they knew everything. The affairs, the theft, the false allegations. I sent them copies of all the evidence, including some photos from your phone that I'm sure they found very enlightening." "You bastard." "I'm the bastard. I'm not the one who committed multiple felonies." She stood there on my porch, broken and defeated, with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. A year ago, I might have felt sorry for her. Now I felt nothing but satisfaction. "The divorce papers will be served tomorrow," I said. "Don't contest it. You have nothing to gain and everything to lose. And if I do contest it, then I'll make sure every sordid detail becomes public record. The affairs, the theft, the pills incident, and all of it. Your reputation is already destroyed, but I can make it so much worse." She turned and walked away without another word, her shoulders shaking with it. I watched her disappear around the corner, then went back inside and called Tommy. "She came by," I said. How'd that go?" "About like you'd expect. She's broken, desperate, and still trying to manipulate me. You almost sound sorry for her, almost. But then I remember what she tried to do to me and the feeling passes. So what's next? Next, we finish this." That evening, I drove to the Lantern, the local bar where everyone in town eventually ended up. It was the kind of place where secrets were shared, gossip was currency, and reputations were made or destroyed over cheap beer and whiskey. Frankie Torino owned the Lantern. He was 65, built like a retired boxer, and knew more about the private lives of our town's residents than the FBI. He'd been running the bar for 30 years, and in that time, he'd become the unofficial confessor for half the population. "Nick," he called out when I walked in, "heard you've been having some excitement lately." "You could say that. Beer? Make it a double whiskey. I'm celebrating." "Celebrating what?" "My divorce." Frankie poured the whiskey and slid it across the bar. "To freedom," he said, raising his own glass. We drank and I felt the warmth spread through my chest. It wasn't just the alcohol. It was the knowledge that I'd won. "You know," Frankie said quietly, "Vanessa used to come in here sometimes with her friends from the law firm." "I didn't know that." "Oh yeah, real regular like, and especially the past year or so. Always talking about how she deserved better, how she was too good for this town." He shook his head. "Never could stand people who thought they were better than everyone else." "What did you think of her friends?" "That Greg fellow? Arrogant prick. Always flashing money around, acting like he owned the place. And that paralegal girl, Marcy, nervous as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs. They ever say anything interesting?" Frankie grinned. "You mean like how they were planning to frame you for domestic violence?" or how they'd been skimming money from client accounts. I nearly choked on my whiskey. You knew? Son, I've been tending bar for 30 years. People tell me things they wouldn't tell their priests. Your wife and her friends weren't as smart as they thought they were. Why didn't you warn me? Wasn't my place. Besides, I figured a smart guy like you would figure it out eventually. Smart guy? Everyone keeps telling me how stupid I am. People who think mechanics are stupid usually end up learning otherwise. You work with your hands, but that doesn't mean you don't think with your head. We drank in comfortable silence for a while, watching the evening crowd filter in. Construction workers, office employees, a few cops from the local precinct. Regular people living regular lives, not trying to scam anyone or destroy marriages for fun. Around 9 o'clock, the door opened and Greg Porter walked in. He looked terrible. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled and stained. His face was pale and drawn, like he hadn't slept in weeks. The bar went quiet as people recognized him from the news coverage. Greg looked around nervously, then approached the bar. "Whiskey," he told Frankie. "Make it a triple." "You sure about that, son? You look like you've already had a few." "Just pour the drink." Frankie shrugged and poured the whiskey. Greg drank it in one gulp, then ordered another. "Rough week?" I asked conversationally. Greg turned and saw me for the first time. His face went white. "You. Me. This is your fault, all of it." "My fault? How do you figure? If you'd just looked the other way, none of this would have happened. You mean if I just let you keep screwing my wife and stealing money? It wasn't supposed to go this far." "What wasn't? The affairs or the theft?" Greg drank his second whiskey, his hands shaking. "Vanessa said you were stupid. She said you'd never figure it out." Vanessa said a lot of things. Most of them were lies. "I loved her." "No, you didn't. You loved the excitement, the risk, the feeling of getting away with something, but you didn't love her." "How would you know?" "Because if you loved her, you wouldn't have abandoned her the moment things got difficult." Greg stared into his empty glass, unable to argue with that logic. "She's destroyed," he said quietly. "Completely destroyed." "Yes, she is. Doesn't that bother you? Should it? She was your wife." "She was. Past tense. The woman I married died the night she sedated me and went to a hotel room with you." Greg ordered another drink, but Frankie shook his head. "You've had enough, son. Time to go home." "I don't have a home. They repossessed my apartment, froze all my assets." "That's what happens when you steal money," I said. "It was just supposed to be temporary. We were going to pay it back." "With what money?" "We had a plan." "Your plan was to steal more money and hope nobody noticed." "That's not a plan. That's a fantasy." Greg stood up unsteadily, threw a 20 on the bar, and headed for the door. But before he left, he turned back to me. "I hope you're happy." "I am. She really did love you, in the beginning. Maybe, but that doesn't excuse what she became." He nodded and walked out into the night. I never saw him again. 2 months later, the trials began. Vanessa, Greg, and Marcy were all convicted on multiple counts of embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. Vanessa got 5 years in federal prison. Greg got 7, and Marcy got 3 years, plus restitution. I attended every day of the trials, sitting in the back row, watching justice unfold. Vanessa never looked at me, but I could feel her awareness of my presence, like a weight on her shoulders. On the day of her sentencing, she finally turned around and met my eyes. There was no anger there anymore, no hatred or defiance, just resignation and something that might have been regret. But it was too late for regret. As they led her away in handcuffs, I walked out of the courthouse and into the sunshine. Tommy was waiting for me by his truck. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Free, any second thoughts?" "None. Good. Because I've got a 1969 Camaro that needs a complete restoration and the owner's paying top dollar." I climbed into the truck and we drove back to the shop, back to the world of honest work and simple problems that could be solved with the right tools and enough patience. That night, I sat on my porch with a beer and watched the sunset. Mrs. Larkin waved from her garden, and I waved back. Life was good. The divorce had been finalized the week before. I kept the house, the shop, and most of our assets. Vanessa kept her debts and her criminal record. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "I'm sorry for everything. I know it doesn't matter now, but I wanted you to know." It was from Vanessa, probably smuggled out of prison somehow. I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Some apologies come too late to matter. I finished my beer and went inside. Tomorrow there would be cars to fix, customers to satisfy, and a life to rebuild. But tonight I was content to sit in my own house, in my own chair, surrounded by the peace that comes from knowing that justice had been served. Vanessa had told me once that she wanted a different life. Well, now she had one, and it was all the wrong rooms.